Chicago's property taxes are on the rise. The city and its school system face a deepening pension crisis. But Chicago has a special stash of cash that is off limits for many of its most pressing needs. $1.3 billion that the mayor controls. It comes from something called tax increment financing, commonly known as TIF. The money is supposed to encourage investment in blighted neighborhoods, but critics claim that far too often it is a piggy bank for connected developers.
We're trying to understand TIFs.
Okay, I'm trying to explain it to you.
We don't feel like we're getting a truthful answer from our alderman, and that's ridiculous.
We've never heard a number of what this total project is going to cost.
Thank you.
So I'd like to hear that answer too. What is the cost of the project so that we know whether a TIF is really needed?
Thank you.
In late March, the tension simmered as Alderman Joe Moreno fielded questions from residents in his North Side ward. Some angrily objected to the city's long-delayed plans for a new TIF district. The tax money is supposed to redevelop nearly 35 acres occupied by the Lathrop Homes public housing project. All but 150 of the 925 units in the old buildings built in 1938 are now vacant. The new development would include a mix of public, low-income, and market-rate housing. But longtime Lathrop resident JUANITA Stevenson is worried.
I want to know about what benefits are there in the TIF for the residents of Lathrop Homes, because this is a community that residents together build together.
That question, who really benefits from TIF projects, is at the heart of a raging debate.
TIFs were started to help poor communities, basically, and put jobs and generate new property tax in so-called blighted areas.
Tom Tresser, a community activist, leads an organization that opposes the way Chicago creates TIF districts. He believes their original purpose has given way to a handout for developers.
It hasn't worked out at all as intended. In fact, it's worked the opposite, and it's a bit of robbing the poor to pay the rich.
In a TIF district, a boundary is set for 23 years. Inside that district, tax revenues for schools and city services are frozen at current levels. But as property values rise, all new tax money is set aside for economic development. That money can be spent for public works projects and on subsidies for private developers.
And it's a cash gift, not a loan. It's a cash gift to the developer to incent them to do a project in a place where the market has fled.
But in Chicago, Tresser says, much of the money has not gone to blighted areas. Take a look at this map from the Chicago Reader. The far south and southwest sides, some of the poorest parts of Chicago, have received only a fraction of TIF funds. The lion's share spent in the central part of the city, from north of downtown to the South Loop. The company that bought the Sears Tower, renamed Willis Tower, got TIF money. So did developers of this upscale apartment building in the West Loop. And now, a new Marriott hotel at the South Loop site of DePaul's new basketball arena will get the gift of TIF, too.
Why do we need to give a billionaire corporation $55 million of hard-earned property taxes at a time when we've closed schools and so many other essential services? Why can't they build that hotel by themselves?
Mayor Emanuel insists his administration is reforming the way TIF money is spent after abuses in the Daley years. For example, the city is spending more than $300 million on road and bridge repair, another $155 million for rebuilding CTA stations, and more than $100 million in TIF funds for school construction.
I think the program is much better managed now than it used to be, but in an era when we're short of money all over the place and they're closing schools or whatever, people look at this big pot of money and say, aha, don't spend it on that, spend it on me.
On the west side, TIF money is redeveloping Mount Sinai Hospital. On the south side, a new Whole Food store in Englewood. And in Pullman, big TIF projects include a residential retail complex near Walmart, the new Harris Soap Factory, and a planned Whole Foods distribution center that's moving from Indiana.
We talk about bringing jobs into the area. Well, we've been able to bring jobs in from Indiana, where ordinarily we're losing jobs to Indiana.
Alderman Anthony Beale says the TIF investments in Pullman have led to more jobs, less crime, and a stronger local economy.
People are now shopping in my community. They're working in my community once again. So we've been able to leverage TIP dollars with private corporate dollars in order to help revitalize a particular community.
But in Uptown, on the north side, another new TIF plan is drawing fire from some residents.
The current development involves tearing down these two buildings that are behind me, building a strip mall where we're standing, building two high-rises across the street on the west side, and we're against the use of our tax money to pay for these buildings, a luxury development.
The private developer for this project would receive nearly $16 million from the city to subsidize a $125 million development.
There's this siphoning off of tax monies away from what they're supposed to be spent on our parks, our schools, services, and towards development, but supposedly in areas that are blighted. Right? So I guess, also my question would be, does this look like a blighted area?
But blight may be in the eye of the beholder. At the crumbling Lathrop Homes site, the city has given a green light to spending TIF money on redevelopment, but it is a sensitive subject for Alderman Moreno, so sensitive that when our producer tried to ask him about it, he walked away.
Okay. Those folks would know. Okay, I gotta go.
Mayor Emanuel says he is now phasing out 7 TIF districts in the downtown area. And joining us now to talk more about TIFs and other big stories are Chris Lentino, manager of Chicago outreach for the Illinois Policy Institute, Doma T. Pongo, news anchor for WVON AM 1690, and Abe Scarr, director of the Illinois Public Interest Research Group, and welcome everybody. So Chris, let me begin with you. The mayor now says he's phasing out downtown TIF money, wants to move it to the neighborhoods. Is this a move in the right direction?
Well, we have to remember what TIFs really are. Again, the idea is that it's supposed to revitalize economically blighted areas. And that's really well-intentioned, but well-intentioned things don't always work out as they're planned.
Especially in Chicago.
Absolutely. and we see that specifically with Lathrop Homes. So Lathrop Homes is a public housing development on the north side that has been neglected. And what the mayor would like to do is redevelop it with mixed-use housing. Now, because it is a public housing development, that land is completely tax exempt. So when this new market rate housing comes in, 100% of those tax dollars are going into the TIF. They're not going to the parks. They're not going to CPS. And that's a problem. And what we see is that TIFs are just a bad idea because they're siphoning off and diverting funds from the taxing bodies that desperately need them.
But we saw Doma T. in Pullman. The alderman says, look, TIFs have brought development to a blighted area with the Walmart, with the Harris factory, with the Whole Foods distribution center. He says crime is down, employment is up. He's got a more stable community. Don't TIFs make sense for areas like that?
Absolutely. I think if done correctly, this would be something that the city needs. Even as we talk about things that are tangentially connected to economic empowerment in these communities, it'll affect crime in these areas. I mean, we talk about police reform. These areas wouldn't have to be as aggressively policed if there were some economic opportunities going on in these areas. To say that TIFs are a bad idea altogether, I don't think it's a bad idea. The way it's being executed is what's most troubling. And a lot of these developers wouldn't come to these communities if not for something like TIFs.
Well, that's an important point, Abe. I mean, would these areas like Pullman, would they even be developed if it were not for this TIF money?
Not necessarily, or some economic development money in general. And that's really what we're talking about, is economic development. And the problem with TIFs is that instead of us starting with a plan for the whole city and looking at the needs of the whole city and the needs of the neighborhoods and where we really do need to invest and where private investment would not occur but for some public investment as well, instead of doing that in a holistic way, it's done in this rather untransparent, piecemeal process that isn't governed by a deliberative democratic process. And so we have some projects that are worthwhile and then others that are quite questionable. And there's been a lot of concerns because of that over the years.
But I guess the bigger question is the movement now in the right direction. We saw during the Daley years, frankly, some abuse where all the TIF money was going downtown to some very wealthy developers. And now it does seem to be going out into the neighborhoods a little bit more under this new plan from Ron.
Well, absolutely. But when we're talking about Lathrop homes, let's be very clear about this. We are not talking about a blighted area. We are talking about an area just outside of Lincoln Park where the land value is quite high. So we're not talking about redeveloping a blighted area. We're not talking about Pullman. We're not talking about Gresham. We're talking about just outside of Lincoln Park and spending a lot of money in that area. And again, bringing it back, the reason why TIFs are such a bad idea is because ultimately the people who end up paying for these TIF projects are the taxpayers. Because that money, again, is not going to the taxing bodies.
Do you think the city would be better off without TIF altogether?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is no doubt that the city without TIF would be better off simply because the taxing bodies would be able to get their share of the tax dollars, allowing the tax levies, which are currently exorbitant in the city of Chicago, to come down for regular homeowners. Everybody, whether or not they live in a TIF district, is paying for TIFs. And there are a lot of areas in this city that are not a part of a TIF district and are not getting any share of that money, but they're definitely paying for it.
All right, let's move on. Go ahead.
Really quickly, what we're dealing with here is you're looking at 48% of the TIF money going to an already wealthy area. You make a good point that these areas are not blighted communities. So why is it incumbent upon the city to invest in an area that is not blighted? We need to take those funds and put those in other areas of the city. If Inglewood doesn't look like Ravenswood, the whole city suffers. And I think that's why TIF districts, if done correctly, is something that can really empower some of these communities that are being underserved right now.
This is one of those subjects that we could go on for hours about.